The hum of the city, the warmth of a perfect summer evening, the comforting weight of routine. That's what I remember most about the before. The world before the shatter. One moment I was just living. The next, a shadow fell across my window, too sharp, too fast. Not a bird, not a cloud. Then, the splintering wood, the sickening crack of glass, and the cold, dead air rushing in where warmth used to be. Not a break-in. This was an invasion. A surgical strike aimed at me, or at least at what was inside. I didn't see faces, only shapes, shadows moving with a brutal efficiency that screamed professional. My breath caught. A tiny, fragile bird trapped in my own throat. The thud of boots on my floorboards wasn't just sound. It was a drumbeat of approaching terror. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for something else. Something I didn't even know I possessed. Or maybe, something I was. Every instinct screamed run. But where? My own home, my sanctuary, had become a cage. The creak of a floorboard above, the whisper of a suppressed laugh, the click of a weapon chambering around. It wasn't just my life on the line anymore. It was the complete erasure of everything I knew, everything I had ever been. The muffled shouts from outside, the frantic barking of distant dogs. They weren't coming for me. No one was. And as I pressed myself further into the suffocating darkness of the crawl space, heart hammering against the damp earth, I knew this wasn't a nightmare I could wake from. This was a new reality. And it had just kicked the door down, leaving no escape. The world was a grid, every obstacle a variable, every life a calculation. Elias moved through the shadows of the heavily guarded facility like a whisper made of steel. A silent snap of a neck, the muffled thud of a collapsing body, each movement a testament to years of honed brutality. His breath, cold and steady, was the only sound he allowed himself to hear above the dull thrum of the facility's core. He was a phantom, his hands efficient instruments of destruction, breaking bone, silencing alarms, dismantling security with chilling precision. For a fleeting instant, a phantom image shimmered in his periphery, Lila's laugh. A sunbeam in a forgotten room, a ghost in the machine, quickly extinguished by the cold imperative of the mission. Success, he reminded himself, was the only currency. His opulent penthouse apartment, a monument to the power he'd amassed, felt like a gilded cage. He stood silhouetted against the sweeping city skyline, a king on a desolate throne. The silence here was louder, heavier than any battlefield. His fingers traced the faded creases of a worn photograph, Lila, younger, radiant. Her smile a beacon from a life he'd deliberately abandoned. All this, the wealth, the influence, the cold solitude, was the price of his success. But success felt hollow, a trophy he held alone. The whispered promise, long buried beneath layers of blood and ambition, clawed its way back. The cost was too high. He would return not for the hand, but for her. He would go back and reclaim the only thing that ever mattered. The journey back was a descent into a forgotten dream, or perhaps, a waking nightmare. His old city, once a vibrant tapestry of shared memories, had been reshaped, scarred by progress. Grittier, colder. Its skyline now a jagged symphony of chrome and glass, pierced by holographic advertisements that flickered like nervous ghosts. The very air felt different, charged with a technological hum that drowned out the echoes of his past. Anticipation, a knot in his gut, fought with a growing sense of unease. He was a ghost returning to a graveyard of his former self, hoping to find a single, living flower among the stones. Every mile was a step further into an unknown, the promise of reunion tinged with a chilling apprehension. This wasn't the city he remembered. The familiar corners had been erased, replaced by towering, unfeeling concrete monoliths and labyrinthine alleys choked with gleaming tech and forgotten dreams. The air thrummed with the low hum of automated vehicles and the cacophony of a million digital whispers. He moved through the indifferent crowds, a stranger in his own past, searching for a ghost he wasn't sure still existed. Every face was new, every street a betrayal. The vibrant pulse of his memories had been paved over, leaving only a stark, brutal landscape. Doubt, cold and sharp, began to pierce through his resolve. Where did you go, Lila? What remained of us in this brutal new world? The address was correct, but the building was a tomb. Lila's old apartment, once filled with warmth and laughter, was now a derelict husk, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at a changed world. Graffiti snaked across its decaying facade, a testament to neglect. Or perhaps, worse, it had been repurposed, a forgotten echo in a city that had no room for sentiment. Every trace of their shared history, had been systematically erased, a violent act of urban amnesia. Frustration, cold and pure, ignited within him, hardening his resolve. This wasn't just a search anymore. It was an excavation. He wouldn't leave until he uncovered every hidden stone, until he found the truth, no matter how deeply buried. The secure channel flickered to life, Anya's face, sharp and unyielding, materializing on the screen. He'd expected the retirement payout, the final accounting for a life spent in service, a cold peace earned. Instead, her voice, devoid of warmth, delivered a different decree. Your services are still required, Elias. A critical threat has emerged. The hand is bleeding. A new mission, urgent, unforgiving. The Weaver, she called her. A ghost in the machine, systematically dismantling their global network. Retirement was a luxury he couldn't afford, a promise held hostage. His quest for Lila was suddenly dwarfed, shadowed by the relentless grip of the obsidian hand, pulling him back into the abyss he'd tried so hard to escape. Anya's dossier painted a chilling portrait of an unseen adversary. The Weaver wasn't just a hacker. She was an architect of chaos, an unparalleled tactical genius. Each page detailed a surgical strike, an intricate dismantling of obsidian hand operations across continents. Secure data centers breached, supply lines crippled, key assets neutralized with an audacious precision that defied belief. But as Elias scrolled through the fragmented reports, the blurry images, a prickle of something unsettling stirred within him. Pattern, a style, a ghost of a memory, vague yet potent, whispered across the chasm of his past. A flicker of recognition, a chilling familiarity in the meticulous destruction. The Weaver was more than just a threat. She felt like a forgotten echo. The visuals Anya projected were a raw, brutal demonstration of the Weaver's power. A colossal data center, once a fortress of information, erupted into a towering inferno, its metal skeleton twisting into grotesque shapes against a darkening sky. This wasn't just an explosion. It was a digital gut punch. The ripple effect was immediate. Traffic lights blinked out, financial markets plunged into chaos, power grids flickered and died across entire districts. Infrastructure groaned, then collapsed, under the relentless assault. Elias watched, a grim understanding settling in. The precision, the sheer audacity of the operation, was breathtaking. This wasn't mindless destruction. It was a carefully choreographed symphony of devastation, executed by a mind both brilliant and terrifyingly efficient. This was a war fought on a new frontier. The flickering data streams painted a gruesome mosaic on Elias's monitors, each line of code a whisper of the Weaver's ghost in the machine. He sifted through the digital wreckage, tracing the devastating efficiency, the chilling precision that had brought down high-security networks with surgical contempt. But beneath the cold logic, something else emerged, a rhythm, an almost lyrical cadence in the code's execution, an unconventional flourish that spoke of artistry more than mere hacking. It was a signature, subtle yet undeniable, a ghost echo from a past he'd long buried under layers of combat and cynicism, a forgotten pattern, a hauntingly familiar touch, stirred in the quiet corners of his mind, rattling the cages of unsettling memories he thought were long sealed away. The certainty that this wasn't just another faceless adversary began to solidify, chilling him more than any threat of violence ever could. He plunged deeper, breaching the obsidian hand's most sacrosanct digital fortress, a network designed to be impenetrable, a vault for their darkest sins. The layers of encryption peeled back like dead skin, revealing fragments of raw, unfiltered data that punched through the screen, searing into Elias's mind. The Weaver wasn't merely targeting high-value assets. She was systematically dismantling the organization's very foundations, exposing their most criminal dealings, illicit arms trades, black market bioweaponry, human trafficking routes. This wasn't a vendetta against a single operation. It was a crusade against an empire built on shadows. Each fragmented file, each decrypted message, whispered of a vast conspiracy, a meticulous, relentless mission to burn the obsidian hand to the ground, and in doing so, dragging every ghost from Elias's own past into the searing light. The fragmented data, the artistic signature, the unwavering precision, it all coalesced into a chilling, undeniable truth. Elias knew, with a certainty that settled like ice in his gut, who the Weaver was. But knowing wasn't enough. He needed proof, a physical manifestation of a digital phantom. He crafted a trap, a meticulously orchestrated snare designed not to capture, but to reveal. The bait, a critical obsidian hand asset, a digital key to their entire South Asian operations, seemingly vulnerable. He would leave it exposed, a shimmering, irresistible lure in the heart of their secured network. He anticipated her move, the precise moment she would strike, not with a cyber attack, but in person. This wouldn't be a chess match of code, but a deadly ballet of flesh and steel, forcing her from the digital shadows into the brutal, undeniable reality he inhabited. The bait was taken. The digital lure, too tempting to resist, pulled the Weaver into the physical world. Elias moved through the skeletal remains of a high-tech research facility, a symphony of silenced footsteps and shallow breaths. Each shadow held the promise of an ambush, each silent hum of dormant machinery a potential tripwire. This wasn't a blind hunt. It was a deadly dance, both participants keenly aware of the other's presence, anticipating every feint, every countermove. The stale, metallic air of the facility hung heavy with unspoken threats, the omnipresent hum of ventilation a constant reminder of the unseen eyes. He was hunting a ghost, knowing that the ghost was hunting him back. A perfect predator-prey dynamic born from years of shared, brutal training, now twisted into a fight for survival and ultimate truth. Every fiber of his being was alive, sharpened, ready for the inevitable collision. The labyrinthine corridors echoed with the silent pursuit. Then, a flicker, a momentary, obscured visual as a figure darted across a narrow walkway above him, framed by the cold, blue emergency lighting. It was only a fraction of a second, a fleeting glimpse of motion and form, but it was enough. The way she moved, the subtle shift of her weight, the elegant, almost fluid economy of motion, not just trained but innate. A profound shock ripped through Elias, a visceral jolt that seized his breath. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was recognition, deep in his bones, a memory resurrected with violent force. The posture, the ghost of a particular sway, hauntingly familiar, confirming the darkest whisper that had plagued his mind since the first cryptic signature appeared. His world, already fractured, threatened to shatter completely under the weight of this unbearable, undeniable truth. He cornered her in a sterile, circular chamber, the air thick with ozone and unspoken accusation. A swift, brutal disarming, a practiced move honed over a lifetime of violence. The sleek, stylized mask she wore, a symbol of her digital dominance, was ripped away with a harsh, metallic clang as it hit the floor. The face revealed was a punch to the gut, a betrayal more profound than any bullet could inflict. Lila, the woman he'd left behind, the promise he'd broken, now stood before him, not as a victim, but as the architect of his torment, the Weaver. Elias was utterly stunned, disbelief warring with a horrifying, gut-wrenching certainty. Her eyes met his, once filled with warmth and a vibrant future, now cold, hard, and devoid of any recognition, any flicker of the girl he had loved. They were the eyes of a stranger, a lethal stranger, and the silence in the chamber was deafening. The ghost of Lila, devoid of the warmth he once cherished, launched herself at Elias. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution, fueled by a betrayal he couldn't yet comprehend. Her movements were fluid, lethal, Every strike aimed to incapacitate, to kill. Elias, reeling from the emotional shock, parried, blocked, and countered with instincts honed in 1,000 brutal encounters. The chamber became a maelstrom of calculated violence, bone-jarring impacts, the whiplash of limbs, the grunt of exertion. Both were equally skilled, equally driven, but by different demons. For Elias, it was a desperate struggle to understand, to survive a phantom from his past. For Lila, it was a merciless purge, a brutal rejection of a future that never was, her every action screaming a fury Elias felt in his very soul. Each blow landed with the weight of years of unspoken pain, a duel of two broken people fighting the wreckage of their shared history. Amidst the blur of fists and feet, the searing pain of blows exchanged, Elias desperately tried to break through the impenetrable wall of her rage. Lila, the lighthouse, the promise, he rasped, dredging up a shared memory. A sacred oath whispered under a starlit sky, a fragile anchor to a past he still clung to. For a fleeting instant, a flicker of something human, a spasm of raw pain, contorted Lila's face. It was there, a ghost of the girl he remembered. Then it was gone, instantly replaced by a savage, burning anger. She roared, a guttural sound that tore through the chamber, and with a surge of raw power, pushed him away, sending him sprawling. Her eyes, now alight with a chilling inferno, screamed a visceral rejection of everything they once were. The past, the love, the promise, it all died in that moment, extinguished by a fury he could not comprehend, leaving only the fading echo of a man's broken heart. The air crackled with the raw kinetic energy of their clash, a symphony of violence Elias knew intimately. But this time the rhythm was off. Lila, a phantom born of his own past, moved with a devastating grace he hadn't anticipated. A perfectly timed explosion ripped through the support column she'd rigged, not to kill, but to maim, to disorient. Debris rained down, and a sharp shard of concrete found its mark, tearing through Elias's arm. The pain was secondary to the shock. He saw not just an escape, but a deliberate, calculated move designed to buy time, to wound him just enough. As the facility groveled, groaning under the sudden stress, Lila vanished into the swirling dust and smoke, leaving behind a silence more deafening than the blast. Elias, bleeding and disoriented, was left with a phantom touch, the ghost of her resolve a searing brand on his soul. She was gone and he was shattered. The metallic tang of his own blood filled Elias's senses, a grim counterpoint to the hollow ache in his chest. Physically, he was wounded. Emotionally, he was gutted. Anya, a shadow in the encroaching darkness of the failing facility, emerged, her voice a whip-crack of cold suspicion. She saw the hesitation, the fatal flaw in his perfect execution. "Explain yourself, operative," her voice cut through the ringing in his ears. Elias knew he couldn't. He couldn't articulate the impossible paradox. The woman he was sent to eliminate was the phantom he'd returned for, the one he swore to protect. The mission demanded her death, but his very being recoiled from the thought. The obsidian hand's grasp tightened, an invisible vice, demanding loyalty he no longer possessed, yet couldn't openly defy. The hunter was snared, not by a trap, but by a ghost. Flashback. The world Elias left behind was not the same one Lila now inhabited. The city, a colossal, indifferent beast, had swallowed her whole. His departure had ripped a hole in her universe, leaving an empty canvas where a future once bloomed. Alone, vulnerable, she was a fragile moth caught in the harsh glare of a forgotten lamp. The idealism that had once burned so brightly in her eyes began to gutter, choked by the smog and desperation of endless nights. She navigated labyrinthine alleyways, clinging to the shadows, each day a brutal lesson in survival, each night a battle against the gnawing emptiness. The dreams of a shared future, once vibrant, were now just faded echoes in the cacophony of an unforgiving metropolis, slowly eroding her very soul. Flashback. In the depths of her despair, a whisper found her, not of hope, but of purpose. The Crimson Nexus, a rival serpent in the urban jungle, saw not a victim, but a weapon. They preyed on the raw wound Elias had left, on the anger festering beneath her fragile exterior. A shadowy figure, impeccably dressed, extended a hand in a dimly lit, opulent room, an offer that felt less like salvation and more like a pact with the devil. The obsidian hand took everything from you. Their voice, smooth as silk, promised. We offer you the means to take it back. Power, vengeance, a new life. It was a seductive poison, an antidote to the despair that threatened to consume her. In her darkest hour, Lila stepped into the serpent's embrace, trading her broken heart for a cold, sharp edge. Flashback. The crucible of the Crimson Nexus proved a brutal, relentless forge. Her soft edges were hammered into steel. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, each moment a lesson in lethality.
Combat, fluide, brutal, efficient.
Espionage. A delicate dance of lies and observation. Hacking. A binary language whispering secrets from the heart of the digital realm. Her body became a finely tuned instrument, her mind a razor-sharp blade. The tears she'd cried for Elias were replaced by the sweat of relentless training. The idealism he'd cherished burned away, leaving only ruthless efficiency. She was no longer a victim, but an architect of her own fate. A phantom no longer, but a force. The metamorphosis was complete, a phoenix rising from ashes, but with wings forged of fire and vengeance. Flashback. As a skilled operative, the veil began to lift. The Crimson Nexus fed her whispers, clues, encrypted files, and Lila. Now the Weaver pieced together the horrifying tapestry of the Obsidian Hand's true nature. Global atrocities, silent coups, systemic oppression, a meticulously engineered web of depravity. Elias's face flashed across her mind, not as the monster, but as the unwitting architect, the complicit soldier in a war he didn't fully comprehend. The realization was a devastating blow, shattering the last fragments of the belief she held for the man she loved. He wasn't just gone. He was part of the system that had crushed her. His silence wasn't absence. It was complicity. The world she once knew, the love she once clung to, dissolved into a bitter, undeniable truth. Flashback. The old Lila, the girl who waited, was dead. She shed her former identity like a discarded skin, choosing a new name, a new purpose. The Weaver. It was more than a moniker. It was a manifesto. She would weave a new destiny, thread by thread, a tapestry of vengeance against the system that had devoured her life, and against the man who had abandoned her to its cruel mercies. The transformation was complete, etched into her very being. The ghost of Elias no longer haunted her. He was now the target. Her heart, once broken, was now forged into something harder, colder, a weapon capable of dismantling the very foundations of the Obsidian Hand. The Weaver was born, not from hate, but from the brutal clarity of truth. Back in the present, the pieces clicked into place, not through Lila's accusations, but through Elias's own tireless, independent excavation. The deeper he dug into the Obsidian Hand's hidden archives, the more horrific the truth became. The global atrocities Lila had spoken of were merely symptoms of a far more insidious disease, a centuries-old conspiracy to control economies, manipulate governments, and shape humanity's future through orchestrated chaos. His own mission, his entire life, had been a pawn in a game of unspeakable scale. Lila's crusade was not merely vengeance. It was a desperate, righteous war against an evil so vast, so entrenched, it threatened to consume the world. The crushing weight of his complicity, his blindness, settled upon him, forcing a moral reckoning he could no longer escape. The sterile glow of Anya's office did little to mask the insidious rot Elias knew lay at Obsidian Hand's core. He laid bare the truth, the horrific cost of their progress, the lives crushed under the weight of their ambition, arguing not for rebellion, but for a course correction. Anya, a statue of chilling composure, merely arched a brow, her gaze like chipped ice. She dismissed his pleas as naive propaganda, a flicker of sentimentality in a brutal world. And then, the steel. A quiet, chilling threat that promised to unravel not just his life, but any shred of peace he hoped to find. The air thickened with unspoken violence, a silent detonation that severed the last thread of his loyalty. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of his past, Elias knew he was truly alone, a defector forged in the crucible of his own moral reckoning, no longer a pawn, but a man on the precipice. The city sprawled beneath him, a glittering tapestry of lives he'd once been paid to extinguish or control. Now it represented something else entirely. A battlefield, a sanctuary, a ghost. Elias gripped the data chip, cold and sharp against his palm, holding the digital heart of Obsidian Hand's darkest secrets. The decision was made, not in a surge of heroism, but in the quiet, desperate realization that there was no other path. To protect Lila, to expose the very organization that had forged him into a weapon, meant erasing his own existence. He would become a phantom, a hunted man, facing not only the relentless pursuit of his former masters, but the unwavering, searing hatred of the woman he intended to save. The weight of his choice was a physical thing, a crushing burden, yet beneath it, a strange, grim resolve solidified. This wasn't redemption, not yet. This was the first step into the abyss, a desperate gamble for a future he might never live to see, but one he knew he had to secure, for her. Deep within the city's forgotten veins, Lila, code-named the Weaver, moved with the predatory grace of a cyber assassin. Her fingers danced across a holographic interface, a symphony of keystrokes initiating the crescendo of her life's work. The glowing lines of code on her face reflected the enormity of her ambition. A direct, surgical strike against Obsidian Hand's central server and command facility. This wasn't just a hack. It was an act of digital warfare, a carefully orchestrated campaign to sever the organization's nerve center, to unravel them from the inside out. The air in her hidden bunker hummed with the electric tension of impending conflict, the whir of cooling fans a relentless heartbeat against the silence. Every flicker of data, every bypass, every digital lock she shattered was a whisper of the past, a promise made to the ghosts of those Obsidian Hand had consumed. She was the storm, building, ready to break, her single-minded focus an unbreakable shield against doubt, against fear. Like a serpent disturbed, Obsidian Hand recoiled, then struck. A torrent of crimson alarms erupted across their command facility, shattering the cold silence. Anya, her face a mask of absolute fury, barked orders into the comms, her voice a whip cracking through the chaos. Their sophisticated defenses, designed to be impregnable, had been breached. The Weaver was inside. Within seconds, a meticulously trained elite force, clad in sleek, dark combat armor, were mobilized. Hovercrafts screamed to life. Assault teams rappelled down hidden shafts, and advanced weaponry powered up with an ominous whine. This wasn't a containment effort. It was a scorched earth counteroffensive. Every asset, every operative, every devastating tool at their disposal was unleashed, a tide of overwhelming force converging on the digital breach. The very foundations of Obsidian Hand vibrated with their enraged response, a behemoth waking to crush the audacious fly that dared to sting its eye. The hunt had begun, relentless and unforgiving. From a forgotten terminal hidden deep within the city's labyrinthine underbelly, Elias sent his warning. A fragmented, encrypted burst of data, a desperate plea shot across the digital chasm, carrying the weight of his impossible choice. He knew Lila would ignore it, that her vengeance burned too brightly to be doused by caution. But he had to try. Miles away, lost in the furious ballet of her hack, Lila's screen flickered with the incoming message. A single, stark line of code. Anomalous, unexpected. Her fingers, a blur just moments before, hesitated. A micro-expression, a flicker of doubt, of recognition, crossed her face. The name Elias was buried within the code, a phantom from a life she had meticulously purged. The memory was a ghost, a momentary hesitation. But the fire of her mission, fueled by years of simmering rage, quickly reasserted itself. She pushed forward, her jaw clenching, the flicker of doubt extinguished by the burning certainty of her objective. even as a cold dread began to coil in her gut. The path to Lila's objective was a gauntlet of steel and shadows, a brutal testament to Obsidian Hand's defenses. Elias moved through it like a ghost made of muscle and fury, each brutal impact a declaration of war against his former life. Suppressed gunfire spat whispers of death as operatives fell, their advanced armor proving useless against his visceral, practiced violence. He vaulted over laser grids, slid under automated sentries, his movements a blur of honed precision and desperate speed. The air was thick with the acrid smell of ozone and expended ordnance, the clang of metal on metal echoing his relentless advance. Every step was a defiance, every kill a severing of the ties that once bound him. He was a force of nature, driven by an almost animalistic need to reach her, a one-man army carving a bloody, brutal path through the heart of the organization that had created him, now intent on destroying him. There was no hesitation, only the relentless momentum of a man fighting for the last sliver of his soul. The final chamber was a maelstrom of gunfire and desperate shouts. Lila, blood streaking her temple, was a cornered tigress, her movements a blur of desperate defense against the overwhelming tide of Obsidian Hand operatives. Her every strike was precise, lethal, but the numbers were against her. Just as a heavy armored enforcer closed in, a deafening crash ripped through the chaos. Elias, a whirlwind of kinetic energy, burst through a reinforced door, sending splinters and operatives flying. Their eyes met across the chaotic battlefield, a fraction of a second, an eternity. In that glance, decades of history, of love and betrayal, of shared pain and unspoken understanding, flashed between them. There was no need for words, no time for explanation. His presence was an answer to a prayer she didn't know she'd uttered. Without hesitation, he plunged into the fray, moving with a savage grace that only she could match, seamlessly joining her desperate stand, an unlikely, explosive reunion forged in the heart of enemy fire. Like a long-dormant mechanism suddenly re-engaged, Elias and Lila moved as one. Their combat styles, once perfectly mirrored in training, now fused in a brutal, elegant dance of destruction. He moved with a heavy, relentless power, a shield and a hammer, while she was a blade, swift and precise, exploiting every opening he created. Back to back, side by side, they carved a path through the onslaught of Obsidian Hand operatives, a deadly duo surprising even themselves with the seamless, almost telepathic coordination. Every block, every strike, every cover fire burst was perfectly anticipated, a silent symphony of lethal intent. The years of separation, the betrayal, the hatred, all melted away under the crucible of shared purpose, replaced by the primal instinct of survival and a reawakened, dangerous synergy. They weren't just fighting. They were reclaiming a forgotten part of themselves, a lethal force unleashed, leaving a trail of fallen enemies in their wake. The synchronized chaos was mesmerizing, terrifying, and utterly unstoppable. The air crackled, thick with the scent of ozone and impending doom. Ahead, the Obsidian Hand's beating heart, the central server array, humming with a million secrets. Lila moved with a grim, practiced efficiency, her fingers flying across the terminal, a silent prayer for a new dawn guiding her. But vengeance demands its tribute. From the shadows, Anya lunged, a phantom of Elias's past, her blade a silver whisper of his failures. This wasn't just a fight. It was a reckoning. Metal shrieked against metal, a brutal ballet of desperation. Elias moved like a storm, every strike a confession, every parry a desperate plea for a future he might never earn. He fought not for himself, but for the flickering hope in Lila's eyes, for the world she was trying to rebuild, even as it crumbled around them. The core groaned, data streaming, systems failing, a torrent of digital destruction unleashed. Silence, cold and vast, descended like a shroud. The screams of digital death had faded, replaced by the ominous groan of structural collapse. The Obsidian Hand's central network was crippled, its vast web of control severed. But victory wore a heavy cost. Elias lay sprawled, blood blossoming on his side, his breath ragged, body screaming in protest. Lila, though less visibly wounded, carried the deeper scars of a spirit stretched to its breaking point, her exhaustion profound. Anya, defeated, lay twisted amidst the debris, her eyes still holding a spark of defiant hatred, a promise of future retribution or perhaps merely a final, bitter acknowledgement of her undoing. The air hung thick with dust and the metallic tang of blood, the ruin around them a monument to their terrible triumph, a grim testament to what they had lost to gain this hollow peace. Her gaze lingered on Elias, a kaleidoscope of what was and what could never be. Gratitude, yes, for his return, for the hell he had walked through for her. But beneath it, a current of pain, deep and unyielding, and the lingering, bitter residue of years of abandonment. He had chosen a side, finally, but the choice had come too late, the chasm between them too wide to bridge. Without a word, a phantom of the woman he once knew, Lila turned. She disappeared into the city's pre-dawn haze, her silhouette swallowed by the sprawling, indifferent concrete. Elias was left alone, surrounded by the wreckage of their war, a broken man in a broken world. He had found his redemption, perhaps, but it was a lonely victory, a solitary burden. He had saved her world, but lost his own, and with it, the only woman he ever truly waited for. The air tasted of ozone and spent fury. The facility crumbled around me, a monument to a truth I never asked for, built on lies I never suspected. I stood there, bathed in the sickly glow of flickering emergency lights, the echoes of gunfire and screams fading into the groaning steel. He was gone, the architect of this entire brutal revelation. Gone, but his shadow, his legacy, lingered. My hands, still trembling, clutched the data chip, the proof. The only thing that could rip apart the veiled empire he had built. But freedom wasn't a clean escape. It was a new kind of prison, built of paranoia and constant vigilance. Every face a potential threat, every shadow a familiar enemy. The world hadn't reset. It had merely revealed its true, monstrous form. As the sirens wailed in the distance, a slow, inevitable crawl towards this wreckage, I knew my life would never be mine again. It belonged to the fight now, to the exposure, to the endless chase. But looking at the sunrise painting the horizon, a bruised, defiant crimson, I also felt it a flicker of something new. Not hope, not yet, but a fierce, unyielding resolve. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so they had forged something far more dangerous. They had forged a weapon, and I was just getting started.